knows, and hopefully all of you, if I called on you individually, which I won't do that and won't put you on the spot, I know you could probably say all the books that we've dealt with thus far, right? Everybody raise your hand, you can say all of them. Hand. Not a soul raise their hand. Okay, guys. Let's say our books of the Bible. Let's get started. Let's start with the very first book, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, and Micah, Nahum. Stop. Now, that's where you're going to be tonight. Old Nahum. Now, let's review just briefly a few things. Thank y'all for doing that, by the way. Do you think it helps you to do that? I mean, I want all of you to be able to say all the books of the Bible. I want every one of you guys to be able to say the books of the Bible. I want you to know them. I want you to know the breakdown of the Bible, which we well know that breakdown of the Bible is what, guys? We got first books is the books of law, and then we have prophecy. Very good. And the prophecy's got two breakdowns. What are they? Say again, baby. Okay, major and minor. Now, all of us understand the difference between the major and minors. Did y'all notice that when you get over here into the minor prophets and you start reading, you only have about 3 chapters there in most of those books to read. And you know, it's easy to read those books and all, but you know the whole concept of the Old Testament, I want you to remember this, and Al and I were just talking a little bit about this. One of the biggest things to remember is the Old Testament was God and the people. And the people, all the way from the Old Testament in the very beginning of Genesis, all the way down to where we're at in the New Testament, and we're still doing it today, it was all about God giving them the things they needed to do and the people not doing the things God instructed them to do. And there was always obedience and there was always disobedience. And the biggest major part of the Old Testament deals with God's people defying God. And we know that there was a covenant made, and that covenant, of course, was a covenant made through that old fellow named what? Abraham. It was with the Jews, not the Gentiles. But that old covenant God made with those people, even though the Jews, they themselves did not do the things that God required of them. And so, each and every time they got off track with God, what happened to the people, y'all? All the way through the Old Testament, what happened to them? They suffered. I mean, they did suffer. And there are a lot of things that God did with them intentionally to cause the suffering because of disobedience. Now, I'm not preaching to you tonight because we're going to look at a couple of the old books, a couple of the minor prophets tonight. But one of the things is, to me, very evident is that things are still going in that direction. We're living under a different covenant. We're living under the New Testament, of course, and we are Gentile, and the Jew and the Gentile no more is a separation there. It's for everybody, but yet it looks as if the same thing is going on today that was going on in the Old Testament. When you look at the whole big picture of everything, God lays it out, and He puts it there for us to understand what to do in the New Testament, and what do? We don't always do what God says do, right? And whenever we don't do what God says do, guess what happens? We get punished. That's exactly right. Now, tonight, let's just review briefly on some of the things that in the book of Hosea. Anybody remember what the name Hosea actually meant? Salvation. Thank you. That's right. And the book of Hosea, which is only 14 chapters, he's one of the longer of the minors. But he's ministering to, remember the split and how this thing works with the kingdoms. We have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. How many tribes is in the northern kingdom? Huh? 10. How many is in the southern kingdom? And what are those two tribes? What? Judah and Benjamin. Now, understand, these guys in the minor prophets, dealing basically with the two tribes that we are concerned mostly with, they deal with a lot, even though Hosea himself is ministering to the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, which is a greater majority of the people, which is a great number of people. It's 10 tribes over there. Now, God instructed old Hosea, and he told him, and you remember last night, we did our little quiz last night, and old Hosea had a wife, and everybody got this one right. You know, everybody got this one right, because who did he marry? Gomer. That's pretty easy to remember. Everybody, I think, last night in our little contest, they got that one right. Hosea married Gomer. Well, the theme is, when you think about this, Hosea married to Gomer, and Gomer wasn't such a good person. And the whole thing about the little book of Hosea was the fact that, you know, the wheel run off because of the fact of the adulterous wife and the faithful husband. That was how it was. And that was kind of a comparable that we made with Israel and God. Now, thing about it is, we didn't spend a lot of time on any of these little books because they are important, but they are books that you can just kind of get an oversight of, and it's not going to change things. We're going to go into the New Testament, though, in a way we're going to do a lot different. I'm working right now on the way I'm going to present the New Testament to you. But the next book we dealt with was the little book of Joel. Anybody remember the little book of Joel and what happens? There's a terrible thing in the book of Joel. The plague of the locusts. Very good. Now I want you to remember that. The plague of the locusts. That's how I remember Joel. The plague of the locusts. Y'all know what locust was, don't you guys? What was it? That's right. Bugs that came along and eat the crops. And there was a reason for that, because that plague was actually what God did with the people. So that's just basically one of the things you want to think about. Now, there are 12 sons of a man named Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, as we well know that. But Joel, the plague of the locusts and the judgment and the priest, Joel was not only a prophet, but he also was a priest accordingly to what we can learn. Now, we don't spend a lot of time on Joel. We spent some time stressing the sovereignty and the power of God and how God dealt with that. The next one we came to was the little book of Amos. There's just 9 chapters in the book of Amos, and I told y'all this is one of my favorite books in the Bible. Amos was kind of like what we are in lots of ways. But what was Amos? He was a farmer and a prophet. And old Amos, you know, he prophesied during a period of when everything was going good. Now, in my lifetime, you know, I've lived through some of the people that you all know didn't do too well with our country. But I lived through some of the people like President Ronald Reagan. I lived through him. I've lived through Donald Trump. And I've lived through some of the ones that did extravagantly good for the country and the nation. Now, in this particular thing, in comparison to Amos, Amos is going through a period of time here. He's prophesying during a time that things are going really good. People have got back on track. They're doing everything. It's kind of like what God wants them to do, and things is prospering, and things are going along, except for the fact that it's not long until the people get to prospering to the extent that they forget about God. And then the wheel runs off again, and there we have it. You know, people, the name Amos means burden barrier, and it was a tough thing for Amos to go down here and talk to the people again, try to get the people online. Now, most of Amos's message was directed toward the nation of Israel, the 10 tribes up north. Now, let's go on over to another little book, Obadiah. I told you in the book of Amos there was 3 major sermons before you get through with that, and you just kind of want to remember that. That'll kind of help you with that. There's the judgment sermon, the crimes of the people, and the call of repentance to the people. Basically, that's what the little book of Amos deals with. The book of Obadiah. The book of Obadiah, as we talked about, it kind of mimics two guys that were born, and they were twins. They were born of the same mother. Does anybody remember those guys? Any of you guys, any young people remember the two guys?
Jacob and Esau.
Jacob and Esau. Thank you, Ian. Now, there's a reason for that. You think about the little book of Obadiah. Jacob and Esau struggle between their respective descendants, and the Edomites and the Israelites is what we're talking about here. The descendants of Jacob, the descendants of Esau, and the struggle between the Edomites and the Israelites. Now, that really and truly is what basically the book of Obadiah is going to deal with. Probably he lived somewhere in the southern kingdom of Judah. We kind of believe that from what indication is. However, one of the things is the hope of God's people that they'll possess not only their own land eventually in the future and things will get back on track for them, but also the fact that hopefully He Himself can change the people back to where they need to be so they can conform back to the message that God has brought. Now, we talked about Jonah. And Jonah was probably one of the most interesting to our young people. Tell me what you know about the book of Jonah. Anybody know anything about the book of Jonah? He what? He was swallowed by a fish. But what was his sole purpose? I mean, why did Jonah get swallowed up by that fish? He was told to go to a city. Now, this is going to be important to you tonight when I'm dealing with the two books we're going to deal with tonight. Jonah is supposed to go down to the city of Nineveh. Understand now, the city of Nineveh, this is Gentile. This is not Jew. These are Gentiles. These are the opposite from God's chosen people. Now, God instructs him, so you go down here to Nineveh and you preach to these people. Well, we all know what Jonah did to start with. He didn't go, and he got swallowed by the big fish, and he spent 3 days and 3 nights. And I told you there's some significance to that 3 days and 3 nights. What was that, young people?
Jesus spent 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb.
Jesus spent 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb, just like Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish. But then, whenever it was that the old fish spewed him out on dry land, did he go? Yes, he did. All right. Now, think about this. What was he going to tell the people? God had a message for him. And Jonah's message was so important to tell the people, this is what God expects and this is what God wants. And Jonah is a prophet that himself was a Galilean. And he's gone down there to a place where they're not real privileged to that of Jonah because they themselves are Gentiles, and things are so different with the Gentiles. They were not part of God's chosen people. But the city of Nineveh, that's going to be a big one tonight as we address some of the things that we want to talk about. Jonah is the only prophet that we have record of that Jesus is likened to in the message that is within itself. Now, the other little book that we looked at very quickly was Micah. Now, Micah. I told you about Micah. He's a downtrodden, very compassionate prophet. And he himself talks about the exploitation of the people of Judah's society. Now, Micah, to say what we learned about him, there's a lot of things going on. And he goes down here and he starts talking to the people about their problems. Now, what are some of the problems that they're facing? Well, the people are abusive. They're abusive to the poor people. The rich people, they take advantage of all the opportunities. That sound pretty familiar? The rich taking advantage of the poor. And this is exactly what was happening. And he's going down there to call out their abuse. And he's saying, you don't need to do this. And so he goes down there and he calls out the abuse of power and influence over for personal gain that the rich people and those that were in high positions of authority that was actually doing to the people. Now, Micah primarily is dealing with prophecy toward Judah. This is what we're going to look at tonight. He's dealing with primarily the prophecy to Judah, which is one of the tribes of the southern kingdom. Now, 700 years before Christ is born, Micah takes place. Now, let's go to the book of Nahum. This is where we're going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about Nahum and Habakkuk. Let's think about what Nahum. Nahum, of course, is a prophet of God. He deals with an impossible, seemingly, prediction because nobody's going to believe him. It's one of the worst things that God says, you go down there and you tell them this is what's going to happen. The great city of Nineveh, now let me tell you about this. The great city of Nineveh that we've already learned that Jonah was supposed to go down there and preach to, the great city of Nineveh has become so powerful and so great and so rich, he said, you've got to go down there to them and talk to them about this. Now, what happens during Nahum's period or prophecy is this was an impossible thing because he's going to go down there and tell them Nineveh's about to be destroyed. He said, that can't possibly be. Nineveh can't be destroyed. Why not? Because it has become such a great fortress and a great city that nobody believes that this is humanly possible for the city of Nineveh to be taken over. I'll tell you about why they believe that in just a moment. But now, 100 years after Jonah's preaching to Nineveh, these people repented when Jonah preached to them, and they got back on track, and these people was doing the things that was supposedly good in the sight of God, and then all at once, kind of like the way it is around here, people do good for a while, and then the wheel runs off, and they don't do so good. Well, it's been 100 years, and Nineveh's really been doing good, and they flourished, and they built a massive, huge, wonderful city, except for the fact that after 100 years, things began to change. God stayed his judgment, and 100 years later, whenever he stayed his judgment, didn't destroy the city of Nineveh during Jonah's time, because Jonah finally went down there after being spewed out from the belly of the fish, and he goes down there and he preaches to the people change and they get back, and they're doing good. And then they begin to prosper. And sometimes prosperity, let me tell you this, sometimes prosperity causes people to forget about God. Y'all believe that? Understand me now, guys. What we're talking about, when somebody gets, everything's going good for them, and everything's going their way, and they begin to think, man, I got it made. And they forget about God, and guess what happens? God has a way of getting their attention. And that's exactly what's going to happen in this particular book. Nahum's talking about Nineveh, and he says, look, you all have forsaken God. Now you're back to a point, God's going to destroy the city. Well, that can't happen. There's no way it can happen. Been 100 years since old Jonah's been down there preaching to them. They've been doing good, and then all at once they decide, we don't need God no more. Prosperity's taken control, and we're doing so good. So God stayed his judgment then, but 100 years later, during Nahum's time, he proclaims the city's going to be destroyed. Gentile-run city, and a country that's determined once again not to do what God said. And they turn back again to violence and idolatry. Y'all know what idolatry is, guys? What is that? The worship of idols, the worship of another god besides God himself. Now, they turn again to the arrogance of rich taking advantage of the poor. Babylon is going to come in, and they're going to be the enemy, the Babylonians. The Assyrians and the Babylonians was always the adversaries of God's people. And that's who God uses. You remember that we learned back in the book of Micah how God uses certain things, and he uses sometimes the enemies in such a way as to get their attention again. And God gets out there and he allows the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and especially the Babylonians at this time, to come back and get the attention. Now this is God's enemies. The Babylonians are God's enemies, and the Assyrians are God's enemies. But God uses his enemies sometimes in such a way to get the attention of those that are his people. Now, this is what happens. When the people, the Babylonians, are going to destroy the city to the extent that no trace of it will ever remain again. That's how bad it's going to be. In the book of Nahum, you find as you read there that this city is going to be destroyed and it's going to be wiped from the face of the earth. This is the great city of Nineveh. Now, the word Nahum, y'all remember this, guys, it's very important. Nahum, the word Nahum means comfort, it means consolation, and this is something that Nahum is about. Consolation and comfort. Now, once the capital city of Assyria, its destruction is going to be with the consolation to the tribe of Judah. Now, we know what the tribe of Judah represents to us and represents to the world. What is the significance of the tribe of Judah? That's the genealogy and lineage of Christ. Now, Nahum was a prophet only to the southern kingdom, which is that of the two tribes that we know about. The southern kingdom. There's going to be Nineveh destroyed. It's a mighty city on the earth. Let me tell you how mighty this city became. The Bible defines it this way and describes it. It has 100 feet walls, 100 feet above the walls of the city. It has a circumvented wall all the way around the city of Nineveh. Not only that, but there is a 150-foot wide and deep moat that goes around the city. It's described as an impregnable city. It's to the point where you just can't, there's just no way any of our adversaries, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, or anybody else, there's no way they can destroy the city of Nineveh. It's the greatest city that they have record of. It became the greatest of all the cities during this period of time. However, this is what Nahum's prophecy is. Nahum's prophecy is God is going to destroy this city of Nineveh. And it seemed so far-fetched from the people that the people didn't pay any attention to Nahum. I mean, this guy's a nut. He's crazy. There's no way. I mean, the city's so great. They got the wall around here. It's 100 foot plus high. We got the moat around the city. There's just no way this can happen. But you'll remember that when God decides to do something, he can do it. However, this man's job was to convince the people, God's going to do this. And here's the people. No, the city's too great. The city's too big. We've got a fortress. This can't happen. It's not going to be something that God can do. Now remember, guys, what he's going to predict and what he's going to prophesy is the destruction of what city? Nineveh. And I told you, what about that city? What did we learn about it? I mean, how is it that... All right. It's got a big wall around it. It's got a moat around it, and there's just no way any human being can ever come in and destroy this city because we got a fortress here. We're protected. But his job was to tell the people, you got to straighten up or God's going to destroy the city. In fact, God is going to destroy the city. Now, you're reading those 3 little chapters. By the way, it only has 3 chapters, guys. Remember that. How many chapters does Nahum have? Okay. All right. Now, Nahum's prophecy of the destruction. Nahum predicted Nineveh would end with an overrunning flood. There's a reason for that. The river. There's a river that runs close to the city of Nineveh. And his prophecy is that this river is going to flood, and when this river floods, it's going to knock down the wall, and when it knocks down the wall, the Assyrians or the Babylonians are going to come through the wall, and they're going to get into the city, and they're going to destroy the city. Now, how are they going to destroy the city? They're going to set fire to it, they're going to kill the people, and they're going to destroy everything within this city. And so, the Tigris River overflows. And you can read about this. If you read the book of Nahum, you can. It don't take long there in chapter 1. You find out what's going on. The Tigris River overflowed. It destroyed the walls. And whenever the walls fell down, after the river came up and washed the walls down, guess what happened? Here comes the enemy. Now, the enemy before hadn't had a chance because these walls were there. They couldn't do anything to the people. And they knew that. But you see, they didn't obey God. And they became to the point that they didn't think God could do what this old guy's saying they could do. So Nahum says, yeah, God's going to do it. He's going to destroy it. So the river overruns. It washes the wall down. The people come through, and guess what they do? They invade. They plunder the city. They burn the city to the ground. And accordingly, if you read in the book of Nahum, as I was reading it there, the city was destroyed in such a way it would be hard to even define or see where the city actually was at one time. That's pretty difficult, isn't it? The city was destroyed. The site was believed to have been discovered sometime later in the 1800s. They think they might have found something that might resemble where Nineveh actually was. But you remember there were two other cities that was destroyed. Anybody remember those cities? Sodom and Gomorrah. And those cities were destroyed. The destruction of those cities was so to the extent that nobody even knows where they once was. They have speculation where they once was, but they don't really know. God burned them off the face of the earth. And he did that for a specific reason. Same way with the city here of Nineveh. Old Jonah did a good job. He went down there after he got out of that old belly of the fish, and he got them on track. And for 100 years they stayed that way, and then afterward they got off track. And then here comes Nahum, man of God, prophet, and says, look, y'all don't do what God said. He's going to destroy the city. Well, he can't do that. The city can't be destroyed, but it does. And so that's what the book of Nahum is about. The site was destroyed. Nahum portrays in his book the patience, the power, the holiness, and the justice of the living God. He gives them every opportunity they have to repent and to do the right thing, but they don't do it. God is, accordingly to Nahum defines God this way. He said, God, you have patience. God, you have power. God, you're holy. You have no doubt, God, slow to wrath. It takes him a while to get mad. But then he says, but the ferociousness of God is horrifying. God settles his account in full, and he destroys the city of Nineveh. So, Israel, the northern kingdom, has already been destroyed because of their disobedience, and they're gone. The Assyrians come in, and the Babylonians come into Nineveh. The people love God's judgment upon the proud and the brutal Assyrians because God decides after he allows and uses them, and they destroy the northern kingdom. God says, look, I don't like them no way. So he comes in and he destroys many of the Assyrian nation. He destroys the adversaries that he used himself. Does that sound like something that might resonate with us today? Think about this. You think God, I don't know how this is. I mean, I know what the New Testament is. I've studied it real hard. Studied it a lot harder than I have the Old. But, the adversaries sometimes, God may very well have an avenue, just like he did here, of letting the enemy be blessed to the extent of destroying the good people, and then he destroys the enemy. And, that's why I guess the Bible says straight is the gate, narrow is the way, and few there be that find it, because there's going to be a few people that believe God is exactly what Nahum said he was. He's slow to wrath, but when he acts, he acts appropriately, and he destroys all the Assyrians that he used to destroy the northern kingdom. And then here we have the city of Nineveh being destroyed because they will themselves not turn. And Nahum predicts and prophesies, and that's what the book of Nahum deals with in the 3 chapters there. Now, let's spend about 10 minutes on the next book. The book of Habakkuk. There's only 3 chapters here. Habakkuk. The word Habakkuk, or the name Habakkuk, means embrace or cling to. Embrace or cling to. Now, Habakkuk is a prophet of God, but I think too, from every indication of reading the book and reading some of the comments about it and some of the things that people have placed in there, I don't know this for a fact, but he could have very easily been not only a prophet, but a priest as well. Habakkuk himself. Now, whether he was or not, we're not going to stand on that for sure, but he could have very easily been a prophet and a priest. He was a prophet, no doubt. Now, Habakkuk. This is so important to what I want you to remember about Habakkuk. Not many people had the courage to question God in any way. And you know, we're not even to teach that it's all right to question God. But the human side of us is this way. We are questioning God in lots of ways. Why, God, are you allowing this? And why, God, do you allow that? And then sometimes when people lose loved ones, they'll say, why, God, did you allow them to die? You know. Well, Habakkuk probably, out of all of the prophets that we study, Habakkuk probably is the one that questioned God more than anybody. Now, he's himself a man who questions God on allowing some to, and this is one of the things you read in the book of Habakkuk. He said, God, why do you let these people violate your law? Why do you let these people sin and you don't do anything about it? Why do you do that? Now, how does this carry over with God? When you begin to read a little bit further on into that, even though he's questioning God and saying, God, why are you letting these people do these things? Why don't you do something about it? Well, this is what he learns. He questions why God allows iniquity to grow, sin to get so vibrant, and it not to be punished. And so Habakkuk is always pushing on God for the punishment of the people. So God uses this. He says, look, I'm going to use Babylon. This is the adversaries now of God's people. This is the adversaries of the Jews. God tells Habakkuk, he says, okay, Habakkuk, I'm going to use Babylon and the Babylonians to do justice for what you're asking. And so he does. God uses Babylon as a rod of judgment. But Habakkuk, even then, he is troubled to know Babylon is more corrupt than Judah. And he says, God, I know Judah's bad, and I know you're going to destroy them, and I know you're going to bring them down, but why are you using somebody that's even worse than they are, the Babylonians? God said, well, you questioned me about why I wasn't doing this. Now I'm going to show you. I'm going to use the worst of the worst to destroy the bad. And so he does. He uses Babylon and the Babylonians as a rod of judgment. And Habakkuk continues on to question God. Trouble knowing Babylon is more corrupt than Judah. But God allows Habakkuk eventually to know he can be trusted in the worst of circumstances because of his matchless wisdom and his goodness and his power. And God opens the eyes of Habakkuk so to the extent that Habakkuk gets to see God is going to bring justice upon the people. And he's going to do it with the bad people, taking care of the bad people. But he's also going to let Habakkuk see that he does exactly what he says he's going to do, and he's going to do it in such a way that Habakkuk eventually says, God, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. So, God's plan is perfect, and it carries out. And in the passage, all iniquity will be punished eventually, and he allows Habakkuk to know that. He says, now you see, Habakkuk, I've done it. And so the righteous can always trust God, and that's something we can carry from the book of Habakkuk. These are my words, and I wrote these words. In chapter 3, it's the most majestic of all the scriptures and records the glory of God. If you read Habakkuk chapter 3, in the past history and in the future history of prophecy, the just will always be the people who live by faith. Now, what about us? It's kind of like this, and it's exactly right. And you know, I would say this to y'all. You know, sometimes we need to be careful to examine our faith. My precious Aunt Verlie told me yesterday to examine my faith, and she was right. If you pray, and you pray hard, you have to pray believing. And examine your faith in such a way, when you ask God to do something, you believe God can. Now, Habakkuk is the greatest example of all of this in the Bible. He's asking God, God, why are you doing this? And why don't you do this? And God eventually allows Habakkuk to see, I'm going to do this, Habakkuk, but I'm going to do it my way. And if you believe this, you'll see it too. And he allows Habakkuk to see that he does just exactly what he needs to do. Now, whenever it is that our faith is strong as Habakkuk's was, even in his questioning of God, he was the prophet to carry the message. And so this is what happens. God, how can you punish a nation using even more wickedness than those being punished? God says, because I'm God. The Babylonians against the southern kingdom of Judah. God is sick of the views of greed. He's sick of the views of aggression, exploitation, extortion, violence. All these things is happening here, immorality and idolatry. The people's gone nuts. That sounds like some of the things we see today. People's gone nuts. Well, listen to what happens. He begins with questioning God, but at the end of the book, when you read at the end of the book, he concludes with the prayers and the praise of God's power. And he said, God, you did just what you said you was going to do. And he praises God for it. His power and his plans, it carries out. And he says, God, I thank you for that. In verse 3, or chapter 3, verse 18, it says, Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, and I will joy in the God of my salvation forever. Chapter 3, verse 18. Now, we studied 2 books. Let's go back now, just for a brief period of time. And you tell me, somebody tell me something that you know about Nahum. I don't care what it is. Do y'all remember anything about Nahum? Hmm? You see, that's good. That boy, he picked up on that right away. He said, that's the one. God says, you go and you tell him I'm going to destroy this major city. Now, what was the problem with the major city? That this man that we're talking about, Nahum, what was the problem with that? I mean,
They said that no one could destroy it because it had walls.
okay, the people actually thought the city could not be destroyed. So the old prophet had a problem. I got to convince these people God's going to destroy the city. They can't destroy this city. Why couldn't they destroy the city, guys?
They had 100-foot walls and 100-foot moat all the way around.
Okay, they had a great moat around it. They had a 100-foot wall, and there's just no way we can do this. But what does God do?
Flooded the river right beside it.
He does what?
Flooded the river right beside it.
Flooded the river right beside. Y'all remember the name of the river? Tigris. Okay, what happened when the river came up? How did the city really get destroyed? The wall was washed down. But my point is, what did God use to destroy the city? He used the worst of the worst to destroy the bad. And this is what the whole thing was about. You know. And so, all right, let's go to Habakkuk real quick. Our time's up tonight. What do we know about Habakkuk, guys? Anything you can remember about Habakkuk? He questions God more than any of the other prophets. And then he finds out at the end, God's good. And he does exactly what he says he's going to do. And that's a great thing. All right. Any other thoughts or comments that you all have? Nahum.
What did you say that it meant?
Nahum, that the comfort and consolation is what, Nahum, if you look up the definition, Nahum, prophet of God, comfort and consolation. Now, whether or not, comfort, Nahum was one of those, supposedly, if you read some of what you can find, and I don't know if they know what they're talking about or not, but Nahum is not as complex as Habakkuk because he doesn't, he's not the one that questions God so much. He's the one that says he's kind of laid back, and he's different from Habakkuk. Habakkuk's the one that's kind of like what some of us are today. Why, God, would you do this? Why, God, are you going to do that? And that's kind of the difference in Nahum and Habakkuk because Nahum doesn't. He's comfort and consolation. And then Habakkuk, he's very different, very different. But Habakkuk is a good one to remember. Y'all remember what the word Habakkuk means? Huh? Cling and embrace. Embrace and cling. What's it mean, guys? Embrace and cling. Okay. Time's up. We're getting close. We're going to go through these books, these next few books, and then we're going to finish the Old Testament. But now when we get to the New Testament, y'all going to see a different teacher. I'm still going to be the teacher, but you're going to see things go a whole lot different because I want you to learn. I'm going to go slow. I'm not going to overview like I'm overviewing now. We're going to learn some real special stuff about the New Testament. We're going to learn a lot of things that maybe we haven't thought about in a long time because I want to stress as much of that as I can. I want, especially for our young men, our young people, our young ladies, I want to work hard on the New Testament, and I want you to know the plan of salvation and what happens, when a person's saved and how and what the Bible teaches about that. I want you to know a little bit about each one of the men in the Bible that authored those books, and we're going to be talking about those men. We're going to spend a lot more time. We may just do one book, and it may take us 2 or 3 nights to do one book, But that's what we're going to do. I'm running you through these minor prophets real quick because just basically all you want to remember about this is planting the seed. The problem is the people. They will not continue to stay on course with God. And all throughout the Old Testament, you got to have the prophets to try to get the people back on. And that was the sole purpose of the prophets and the priests. They made the sacrifices for the people, and they carried God's message to the people, and the people didn't always do what God required. And that's the same way with us, but we're going to do it in a different light and under a different situation with a new covenant. If you're here tonight, subject to the invitation, you may come right now while together we stand and sing.